Jacob, Justin Trudeau is digging his heels in. Yesterday, on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, he spoke to the media and reiterated what he said on Monday, that there was credible allegations of Indian involvement in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. But here's the catch. Neither on Monday nor yesterday did he give any indication whatsoever of any credible evidence to back these allegations, to back these claims. But Canadian media reports are seemingly suggesting that there are intercepts. Canadian intelligence has signal intercepts as well as other intelligence in which it seemingly suggests that there were diplomats in missions, Indian missions in Canada, who were talking about Nijjar's death in the days leading up to his killing. Now, if indeed that is true, that evidence needs to be not just presented to the Indian side, but also made available publicly, because when he chose to make the allegations, he decided to go to the floor of the Parliament in Canada and make the allegations public. So if the evidence is there, then that evidence also needs to be put in the public domain. Despite this huge blowback and perhaps the biggest crisis diplomatically between Ottawa and New Delhi, there is still no evidence that's been put out in the public. Trudeau also said that he raised this issue personally with Prime Minister Modi when he met him at the G20. So, are those not credible? And is that why India has decided to ratchet up the ante and halt all visas for Canadians who are hoping to travel to India? The big question now is, can Trudeau come up with the evidence, or will he have to face the ignominy of a diplomatic climb down?
There are credible reasons to believe that agents of the government of India were involved in the killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil. And we call upon the government of India to engage with us to move forward on getting to the truth of this matter.
The larger issues of terrorism, and not just terrorism, but also the fact that it is being funded and supported, and we know this for some time from our western neighbor Pakistan. But the issue of safe havens and places to operate is being provided abroad, including in Canada.
All right, so this is a massive diplomatic standoff. It's been going on for the better part of the last week. It started off on Monday, the standoff between Ottawa and New Delhi. It started off on Monday with Justin Trudeau going to the Canadian Parliament and publicly saying that they believe, the Canadian side, that there are credible allegations of potential links between Indian agents and the death of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Now, Canada followed that up by expelling the station head, the intelligence station head, in the Indian mission in Ottawa over the Nijjar killing. India, of course, reciprocated a day later by firing that person's equivalent here, the station head, the Canadian station head in New Delhi. Canada then updated its travel advisory. It was a health advisory, but it added an update to that health advisory just a day after the Prime Minister went up in Parliament and made those allegations. And then India responded in kind, reciprocated by putting up a new travel advisory advising Indian citizens to be cautious while traveling to Canada. Then you had Canada calling on India, again this is what Trudeau said yesterday at the sidelines of the UNGA, calling on India to cooperate in the murder probe and also to take the probe seriously. Now, India has suspended visa services temporarily for Canadians, ostensibly because of the threats faced by Indian diplomats in Canada. And because of that, they are not able to process the kind of numbers that they previously used to do. But the big question is, and this is really the moot point in this case, can Justin Trudeau come up with evidence, credible evidence, to back these very, very serious allegations he's made in public? Now, on the 18th of September, Like I said, he stood up in Parliament and made this very, very stunning allegation that Canada believes there are credible allegations of Indian involvement in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. The next day, the 19th, Trudeau, this is after India rejected these allegations and said it's absurd. Trudeau then climbed down a notch and said the intention was not to provoke India or to escalate, but for India to take this issue seriously. Subsequently, on the next day, the 20th of September, Pierre Poilievre, who is the leader of the opposition, and remember on Monday, Trudeau had said that he had spoken to Pierre Poilievre before making the public statement on the floor of the House. But Pierre Poilievre also climbed back and said that Trudeau should come clean. He should tell the country, tell the world, tell India what evidence he has to back these claims. The next day, on the 21st, which was yesterday, on the sidelines of the UNGA in New York, the Canadian Prime Minister stuck to the old charge that he has credible reasons to believe that Indian agents were involved in the killing of Nijjar. On the same day, the Ministry of External Affairs alleged that Canada has not shared any evidence or any information yet. In fact, the MA spokesperson went a notch higher and said that Canada has become a safe haven for terrorists and it should worry about reputational damage arising from there. Now, despite Trudeau's repeated claims, the moot point is this, and this entire diplomatic standoff rests on this simple point. Can Canada, can Justin Trudeau cough up concrete evidence to support these allegations? Now, there is also an inherent duplicity, some would say a double standard, a Western double standard, if you will. Nijjar was not exactly some white sheep. He was a character with dubious past. His entry into Canada was dubious. The manner in which he procured his citizenship was dubious. He was involved in the gang wars in Surrey in British Columbia. Also, there was the video of him training with AK-47s, banned weapons for private citizens in Canada. He was wanted for a number of cases here in India. Letters rogatory were issued as far back as 2015 and 16. There was an Interpol Red Corner notice against him issued in 2017. So, let's be clear who we're talking about. Now, the West has killed on many an occasion foreign nationals on foreign soil. Some of the most high-profile ones. January 2020, the US strike in Iraq killed the then head of the Al-Quds force of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, General Qasem Soleimani. He was killed on foreign soil. In October 2019, the United States killed the ISIS founder Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in Syria, again on foreign soil. In 2015, January, the Al-Qaeda terrorist Abu Anas al-Libi died in US custody after he was apprehended in Libya. In September 2011, US drone strike killed Al-Qaeda leader Anwar al-Awlaki, again in Yemen on foreign soil. And of course, the most famous of it, May 2011, US Navy SEALs in a special operation killed Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad in Pakistan. Now, when the West does not have or does not hold this as a double standard for killing and going after terrorists even on foreign soil, then why should India not? That is a larger question, a more geopolitical question, but I want to first go across to our guests who are joining us. Navdeep Suri is former Indian diplomat and now with the Observer Research Foundation. Pramitpal Chaudhary is practice head of South Asia, the Eurasia Group. Daniel Bodman, senior journalist joining us from Toronto. Michael Rubin is a senior fellow with the American Enterprise Institute. Thank you very much for joining us. Navdeep Suri, let me start with you first. You know, I keep saying this again and again. Very seldom do you have a prime minister of a country going up in parliament and publicly making such grave allegations against a foreign government. Now, 5 days on, we have not seen anything, we've not heard anything in terms of evidence to back up those claims. So either of two things could be possible. Either they don't have that evidence or they don't want to release that evidence at this stage. Which do you think is most likely in this case?
I think there are two aspects to your question, Zaka. One is, why hasn't it been done? I think the obvious answer is that Trudeau is in bed with the NDP. He needs their support and he can't jettison it at a time when his own popularity in the opinion polls is plummeting. But I think, at a different level, there's also something about the nature of intelligence information and how it is shared. My own understanding is that mostly countries and agencies are much more comfortable sharing it with counterpart agencies from friendly countries rather than making these things public. Now, I understand the dichotomy. Why the hell did he make a public statement
Exactly.
in Parliament
Yep.
if he wasn't in a position to share?
Correct.
But I'm just trying to put a nuance here that a lot of times sensitive information picked up by intercepts, picked up by whatever methods, whether through TechInt or signals or whatever, isn't the kind of stuff that agencies put out in public, but they do often share with friendly agencies.
Okay. Pramit Chaudhary, one other thing that Trudeau said, and he said this yesterday at the press conference on the sidelines of the UNGA, that he raised this personally with Prime Minister Modi at the G20. Now, if indeed he has shared whatever evidence or whatever information the Canadian intelligence agencies have about Nijjar's killing and potential Indian involvement in it, then do you believe that Mr. Modi and his government have come to a conclusion that that evidence or whatever information has been shared with them is not good enough, and that's perhaps why India has ratcheted up? I mean, India was the country that went ahead and said, okay, halt all visas for Canadians who want to travel here. Do you think that would be a fair conclusion? You're on mute, Pramit. You'll have to unmute yourself, please.
Sorry.
All right, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Zaka, your voice was a little difficult to understand there. So I'll just say on the question of the visa charge, the visa decision.
Yeah.
Yes, there is, I would say, a gentle escalation taking place here. India wants to send a message to Canada, but it doesn't want to disrupt the relationship beyond a certain point. There are many things India could have done further. For example, on Indian students going to Canada. I mean, the real problem for Indian students going to Canada is that the Canadian High Commission, even before the crisis, was taking 5 months to issue visas.
Correct.
And there's a lot of business relationship that's still taking place. But I think the game both sides are trying to do right now is send messages to each other about the strength or their concerns with each other. But this is standard diplomatic position, and it's not action, it's not an issue. But there's an additional reason I would argue India has had to put a freeze on visas for the time being. There are many, obviously, tens of thousands of Indian Canadians, a lot of them Sikhs, who have PIO cards, who basically have a long-term visa and have almost free entry into India. There is a concern that some Khalistanis may use or try to exploit the present crisis. We saw a Congress politician was assassinated a few days ago, and a Khalistani terrorist claimed responsibility. So my understanding is that a lot of those PIO cards will now be revoked or put under, and a lot of Indians from Canada will now be put under a tight visa screening process, partly because of the concerns that there may be some back.
All right. Let me also, since Pramit mentioned this, I think we have a graphic where we can show. Look, Indo-Canadians form a substantial minority in Canada. If you look at the number of Indian students, for example, Canada is the second most favored destination after the United States. In fact, it is more favored for Indian students than even the UK, where with whom we've had traditional relations. Of course, some of the best universities are there in the UK. But despite that, look at the numbers. In 2018, there were 1,70,000 students who went to Canada. In 2019, it was 2,18,000. It dipped a bit in the COVID years, came down to 1,79,000. But just in the last couple of years, in 2022, it's gone up to over 300,000. Now that is a staggering figure, because 300,000 we're talking about in a community of about 1.5 million, 300,000 are students. And of course, many of these students have gone there in the hope of getting employment opportunities, to finish their course and then get employment opportunities there. So these 300,000 students, they're a substantial number. And of course, because of this diplomatic fracas that's been going on, their futures look a little uncertain. Now, international students, their enrollment in 2022, this is overall in Canada, 40%. And this is again a staggering number of all the international students who come to Canada for higher studies. 40%, 4 out of 10 are Indian, are coming from India. The remaining 60% come from different countries, mostly from China, some from Europe, many from Latin America and Africa, of course. But 40% of all students who enroll in Canadian universities happen to be from India. So this is a huge economy. Now, many have asked the question as to why Canada is not reciprocating, in the sense India's put a halt on visas for Canadians who want to travel to India. Why is Canada not doing the same, putting a halt on visas to Indians, particularly students who want to go to that country? Let me ask Michael Rubin that. Do you see that possibility, Michael Rubin, that Canada could impose, because in diplomacy everything happens reciprocally, so Canada expelled a diplomat, India followed suit, there was an amendment to their travel advisory, India followed suit, but it's India that decided to halt the visas. Do you reckon Canada might do that, or would that hurt their economy in a way that could be debilitating, at least to the student economy?
It's a great question. It would both hurt their economy, but the broader question is whether within the bureaucracy Canadians agree with Justin Trudeau. If they believe that Justin Trudeau went out on a limb for very cynical and superficial reasons, and is leading Canada down the rabbit hole, you're going to have resistance within the Canadian Foreign Ministry about pursuing this to its natural conclusion of tit for tat, breaking of a much more important relationship. And this really is a tragedy on Canada's part. You know, Americans operate through the lens of analogies. And the analogies most Americans will process this through would be the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi writer, former intelligence agent, and dissident in Turkey. When that happened, even though there was no love lost for President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, the Turks provided evidence immediately. And that's what swayed public opinion. As you said in your introduction, either Canada doesn't have the intelligence, it's not as cut and dry, or they weren't prepared to release it. And at the same time, you know, this is really not the beginning of the story. This is the beginning of a new chapter, because Canada has had a lot to answer for as being a hub of terror finance and as being a safe haven for some of these extremely militant, violent terrorist groups.
Just on that point about the comparison with Jamal Khashoggi, and I want to ask Daniel Bodman this, because I'm not sure that people here in India would buy that analogy, because Khashoggi was a journalist, somebody who was taking on the Saudi regime. Nijjar was hardly that. Right. There were multiple FIRs, very serious crimes for which he was wanted here in India. His own entry into Canada, the manner in which he finally managed to procure citizenship, again, very, very dubious, that entire process. And of course, like I said, there was letters rogatory against him. There was a red collar notice against him issued by the Interpol. So he's not some holier than thou figure. Daniel Bodman.
Neither was Jamal Khashoggi. I could find you a picture of Khashoggi in the 80s with AK-47s in Pakistan supporting militant Islamist groups there. He was an open supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, doesn't mean he deserved to be killed. He was murdered. I think the thing here is the Turks provided evidence. Also, is pretty cut and dry. Video, he goes into the embassy in one piece. He comes out of the embassy in multiple pieces. Didn't take a genius to figure that out. This is very different. In Canada, it's not true. This is a Khalistani leader. Say what you will about him. There's no denying it. We saw all the flags at his funeral. We know that there has been Khalistani gang violence. There was just some this week where another leader was killed. So this is a drive-by shooting. We don't know who was in the car. We don't know what their motivations were. We don't really have a concrete, Hardeep Singh Nijjar went into this room in the Indian embassy and then he died. That's not what we have. We have just something happening randomly on the streets and lots of speculation. So I don't see the two things as analogous on a lot of levels. There are some. It's never been the best analogy for me, I would say. But yeah, I could understand India's frustration here because the real thing here is we haven't put forward any evidence for the world, and we cannot just go to the world on a "you gotta trust me." I swear. Cut ties with 1 billion people and an important geopolitical ally. Just take our side. Why? Well, because we think there might be a potential link, according to one intelligence report, that it's a potential link. So that's the thing here. There is no in the world could understand what happened to Khashoggi and empathize with him. No one really knows who was behind this. This is like a random drive-by shooting, which are not uncommon among Khalistani leaders in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is, you have gang wars, you have these street wars, but you don't extrapolate that to create what has become the biggest diplomatic crisis between India and Canada in at least 40 years. But Navdeep Suri, one complication, and we don't know the full story here yet, there was a Canadian Broadcasting Corporation report which put out that Canadian intelligence sources believe that they have information which connects some Indian diplomats with intercepts and signal intercepts and so on, which seems to suggest their involvement. But more than that, that report also suggested that some of this intel may have been shared with Canada by one of their Five Eyes allies, which includes the US, UK, Australia, and New Zealand. If that is the case, and I don't think it takes a genius to guess this, it's most likely the United States. If that is the case, if it's the US that shared this intel with Canada, and then this whole diplomatic fracas has happened, does that complicate this case further? And how?
It does, because then Canada, again, with all the ifs and buts that you put in, then Canada can't really release any information without the US signing off on it. And that's what I meant in my initial comments, that all of this comes down to interagency cooperation. It comes down to what's the comfort level, and something as sensitive as this, where ties with India are concerned. Probably people at the highest level will have to sign off on anything that's released because of the implications of it. So, that process is unfolding as it will unfold. But I do want to add a different point, Zaka, which is, everybody's been talking today about the Pew Opinion poll, which shows that 93% of Sikhs feel very strongly supportive of India within India. And 70%, when questioned, said to be anti-Indian is not to be a Sikh. That's a very strong sentiment that people have expressed. In the last elections that we had in Punjab, the only party that stood on a quasi-autonomous platform or quasi-autonomy platform got 2.4% of the vote. My sort of grief with this is, at a time when Punjab is completely peaceful, you've got these elements 10,000 miles away playing merry hell. Many of them have never visited India, and they are able to create these entities like the Sikhs for Justice, and we are carrying out this sham referendum, and we want to identify a Khalistan out of sitting somewhere in Canada. And the stupidity of even that logic, that if you want to hark back to the 19th century and say, I want to revive the empire that Maharaja Ranjit Singh ran, which is the only time that the Sikhs actually had an empire, well, its borders went all the way to Afghanistan, and much of Pakistan of today would be within that. So you want to set up a Khalistan in South Asia, please look at the country next door. You're looking at the wrong place. So it's just stupid at so many levels. And what galls us is the defense that the Canadians take of free speech. Because at some point, you have a responsibility to, at the time of the French Revolution, wasn't it Rousseau who said that, I have the right to swing my arm, but the right to swing my arm ends where the point of your nose begins.
Yep.
Where does
free speech and an incitement to violence begin?
For me, the most revealing thing, and I'm sure all of our panelists and our viewers remember this as well, I think it was in Brampton a few months ago, there was this float. It's like a tableau play, a float that was taken off Indira Gandhi's assassination with her bodyguards and, the cutouts of her and her bodyguards. A question that I wanted to ask at that time, and I think I asked it in the show as well, would Canada allow a similar float of the 9/11 attackers with the World Trade Towers and the planes going into the World Trade Towers and a cutout of Osama bin Laden and the other, bombers who were there in the airline? Would that be acceptable? I mean, because an act of terrorism is an act of terrorism. So you can't say good terrorists because they killed Indira Gandhi, but bad terrorists because they brought down the Twin Towers, right? Anyway, so let me, the other real domestic reason, and I'll get Pramit also to weigh in on this, this is where polls are right now. This poll out just earlier this morning. If polls were to be held today in Canada, Justin Trudeau would lose, and he'd lose by a wide margin. Overall, amongst all Canadians who took part in that poll, Trudeau is just at 31%. These are his worst poll numbers since he became Prime Minister. This is his second term. Pierre Poilievre, who is the leader of the Conservative Party, the leader of the opposition, he is at 40%, which means there's a 9% differential between Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau. The person who comes third is Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the New Democratic Party. He's got 22%. Not far from Trudeau's own 31%. So you see, what Trudeau's trying to do here is to make sure that Jagmeet and the entire vote that the NDP gets, and I think they have about 24 MPs right now, but at 22% vote share, he could likely get more, or maybe even if he gets around that same figure. What he's trying to ensure is that entire vote that Jagmeet Singh's NDP is garnering, that will stay with the Trudeau coalition. That's what he's trying to do. He's basically trying to show his loyalties to that side, the extreme left wing of this liberal coalition, in a way that it's jeopardizing one of the most important bilateral relationships that Canada has currently. So let me ask Pramit Pal Chaudhary this. I mean, yes, politicians do all kinds of things, domestic political compulsions, compel the best of politicians to do the most stupid things. Is this some sort of an explanation as to why Justin Trudeau has literally, I mean, he's thrown this diplomatic relationship under the bus?
Okay, well, I'm not a complete expert on Canadian politics, but I think, well, yes, he is dependent on the NDP to maintain his presence, his present majority in Parliament. So he has been tacking anyway in that direction. But the NDP, I don't think, is just a Sikh party. It just happens to have a leader who is a Sikh. It's a much more of a labor union party than it is a Sikh party. But I think if you look at the poll, what's striking is that 38% of people don't have an opinion. They didn't know how to respond to Trudeau, and he has been declining in the polls. But so I think for him, it's really about trying to build little bits and pieces of a coalition together to build up his numbers. And part of that is, yes, the Sikh community. But part of that, for example, is also the Ukrainian vote. Ukrainian Canadians are one of the largest ethnic groups in the country. British Columbia, for example, has a large Sikh community. It also has a very large Ukrainian population, which is one of the reasons within the G7, Canada has taken the harshest line on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's a perfectly sound line to take, but it is also partly driven by domestic politics for Trudeau. Ultimately, for a country like Canada, I would argue it doesn't have a major security issue in its neighborhood. It doesn't have major geopolitical concerns because it has the United States next to it. There will be a tendency to allow domestic politics, at even a very minor level, to affect your foreign policy because there are no global repercussions.
Yeah, you're right about that. I mean, its foreign policy towards India has been shaped in large part because of the Indian immigrant community, and particularly the Sikh community. Similarly, its foreign policy towards China has been shaped in large part by the immigrant Taiwanese community, immigrant Hong Kong community, as it were, and of course the Russia-Ukraine comparison that you gave as well. But Daniel Boardman wanted to make a point, and I'm getting a piece of breaking news in connection with this story as well in just a moment. But yes, Daniel.
Yeah, it should be clarified. You got it right. The NDP and the Liberals do hold a coalition together somewhat. It does affect Justin Trudeau. So Jagmeet Singh, he is an ideological Khalistani. We've seen him speak at Khalistani conferences, speak next to people advocating for violent ethnic separatism there. And the way the Canadian system works is the leaders have a lot of power over the party. So you've had this Faustian bargain between Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh last year to keep them in power until 2025. Jagmeet gets his pension at 2025. Justin gets protection from any potential corruption scandals, because if they form a ruling party, which means they can essentially create the jury from the political class that will judge them, so they get to be their own judge, jury, executioner. So this is a driving thing in Canadian politics. So it's not so much vote driving, because you can win the Sikh vote in Canada without Khalistanism. Stephen Harper, former Prime Minister, hugely grew the Sikh involvement in the Conservative Party without any Khalistani nonsense. So it's not more about votes, it's more ideology. And you could say, maybe is there dark money and political and ideological infiltration going through the parties to make these decisions? That's a far more likely answer than just votes, because the vote argument, it actually doesn't make sense vote-wise to go into Khalistani nonsense.
But what explains then, Daniel, Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, he's also taken a very sort of middle-of-the-road line on this when, like you say, there's no need to, because a large majority, an overwhelming majority of the Sikh community is not supportive of these violent ideas to try and establish Khalistan. So why is he also not taken a stronger position than he has from what we've seen of his public statements in the last couple of days?
Okay, the Conservative Party of Canada is reflexively cowardly. Okay, they're too scared to be called racist on anything, and they need to conduct 8,000 poll groups and focus groups before they can form an opinion on anything. So there's also the fear, though, of what Poilievre is doing is he doesn't want to come out against the government right now and present any sort of disunity to the world. We know he probably thinks Trudeau is wrong, but he's kind of falling on his sword here to not create an internal rift that could be exploited by the international community, because our Prime Minister got us in a geopolitical battle with one of our allies for some reason. So I think that would explain it more. And I would expect the Conservative Party to sort of take their time, look at this, see how the Canadian community reacts to all the Khalistani violence. And then, as in standard Conservative Party, once they have 3 months of data and people telling them what to think and how to think, then they'll start to come up with some public opinions.
All right. Just stay on with us. I'm going to come back to our guests in just 1 second, but I've got to go to this piece of breaking news that's coming in. This has been tweeted out just moments ago by the Indian mission in Canada, that consular services for Indian nationals in Canada, that includes issuance of passport, renewal of passport, police clearance certificates, attestations if they need any, will continue to be extended. There won't be any kind of delay or any kind of halt in that. So any consular services that Indian nationals require in Canada, the missions there, and we have 3 of them, they will be continuing with that, as has been the case till before this controversy happened. So let me go across to my colleague Abhishek Jha, who's breaking the story. So a sort of qualitative nuance being put out there. So the halt in visa issuance for Canadian nationals, but for Indian nationals who require regular consular services, those services will continue. Explain to us why this is important and why this tweet had to be put out to make that clarification, Abhishek.
Well, Zaka, this comes as a big relief for Indian nationals who have been living in Canada and who have, for some reason, they might have lost their passport, or they need some other certification or attestation from the embassy or the High Commission of Missions in Canada. And ever since those the detail had come from the BSL that there will be no passport application that will be processed, there was some sort of confusion whether the entire consular service has been closed, the day-to-day operations have been impacted, and whether Indians could still go and get their work done that is essentially needed for them to come back home also. So to clear those confusion, this tweet has been put by the Indian mission in Toronto, where they have said that the consular service remains open for Indian nationals and they can get their passport issuance and renewal and some certification that they might need for essentially for their legal process in Canada also, or maybe to come back home also.
We'll leave it at that. So that important clarification coming in from the Indian mission in Ottawa, that consular services for Indian nationals will continue without any hiccups or without any kind of halt. The halt is for visas for Canadian nationals who want to travel to India. So let me get a closing comment from our guests. I want to go to Michael Rubin. So the big question that's being asked is, how do both sides climb off this diplomatic escalation ladder? Because right now, both of them are on that escalatory mode. Canada expelling a diplomat, India expels a diplomat. Canada modifies its travel advisory. India issues a fresh travel advisory. India then halts visa services. Canada is yet to react to that. The larger question is, someone's got to get off this diplomatic escalation chain, and if they need to, then what may be the face saver to do that?
Well, you know, Justin Trudeau has to be a bit more mature as a leader in this case. I really do think he made a mistake for cynical political reasons, the same way Vice President Joe Biden in 2008 made a mistake castigating Hamid Karzai for U.S. electoral reasons. Donald Trump, 8 years later, talked about building the wall, created a diplomatic crisis, making Mexico pay for it. In this case, Justin Trudeau needs to stop digging the hole. The purpose of the United States in this case should be not to draw moral equivalence between the two. Canada never should have been hosting a terrorist, and I'll make another analogy here, much closer to bin Laden than Jamal Khashoggi in the first place. But if Justin Trudeau insists on digging a hole, the United States should be providing him a ladder to help him climb out. But silence is a virtue in this case. He needs to step down and stop making it a personal issue. The national security importance of this to both India, the United States, and Canada is way too high.
Pramit, what may that ladder be for Justin Trudeau to climb out of the hole that he's in? And also, do you what Michael concluded with, do you believe that this is an intensely personal thing, perhaps because of the way he was treated here when he came for the G20? Pramit Pal? I think, again, you're on mute, Pramit. You need to unmute.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, I missed the question.
No, so the two comments that Michael Rubin just made about, one, the United States has to provide the ladder for Justin Trudeau to climb out of the diplomatic hole that he has dug himself into. So what may that ladder look like? And two, do you think he's done this for personal reasons? Maybe he felt admonished, or he felt that he was not treated well by the hosts when he was here for the G20.
So my sense is that that decision had already been made to confront India about the death of. So I think but I think both Canada and. So I think the sequence is basically we see Canada and the Five Eyes share the information among each other before the G20. He then has a conversation with the G7 members, which essentially are Five Eyes minus New Zealand plus Japan and France. But I don't think there was any. There were media reports that he wanted the G7 to make a statement. That I think is incorrect from what I have heard from a number of diplomatic sources. It was just he used that opportunity to speak to the G7. But one thing, it was very clear that the G7 countries make clear that do not disrupt the G20 summit. Mm-hmm. America had made it very clear to everybody in the Western world that a G20 summit in which India came out looking bad, a G20 summit that failed, would effectively be a victory for China. And this was fundamentally the driving force. American diplomatic support for India during the G20 was crucial to its success. So there was no question, I think, of Canada trying to use the G20 to promote that position. But obviously, Trudeau showed his displeasure. He skipped the dinner. He pulled his hand out of Modi's hands in front of the TV and so on. And then after the G20 summit was over, then he felt the opportunity to go before his parliament and make that. He now was open to the window opened for him to go before his parliament and make the statement that he did.
Okay, Daniel, I'll give you the final word. How do you see this ending? I think I had a guest the other night, Raymond Vickery, who said if Trudeau is not able to publicly demonstrate that this is the evidence to back the claim that he made, it might even be the end of his political career.
Well, we've been staring down the end of Justin Trudeau's political career for massive political scandals for about 8 years now. He's going to make it to 2025. Now, how does this end? 99% chance, really badly for Canada. We don't have any leverage here unless we have a bombshell dynamite report. There's nothing we could do. And even if we do have a report, what can we even make India do? I mean, geopolitics 101, might makes right. What are we gonna do? Send Justin Trudeau over to lecture you guys about the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion? What's our leverage? What's our end game? So this ends when Justin Trudeau sort of puts down the gun and walks back, or when he's voted out of office in 2025. And it's unfortunate and it's sad for Canada and India because we've been allies so long. We fought together in World War II. We're kind of cousins from the old British Empire Commonwealth. It's just sad. It's stupid. It's sad. It's counterproductive, and it's not going to end well. And I really wish we had great relations like we did a couple weeks ago. But
okay, all right, we'll see how this plays out. I suspect, and because of this Five Eyes alliance, I suspect some of the others will also step in the moment they see either, concrete evidence to back these claims or the lack thereof. And I guess some of those countries will also have to step in to try and calm down tempers. But we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much to all our guests for this fascinating conversation.